Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yatha Parakamam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Saganaraganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Harijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Sha Om Agyanatimranda Sha Gyananshana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Urave Namah Kurva Bishtam Supurakam Gurganarasi Shasambhushitam Chintya Chintya Samasta Veda Nipanam Shri Rupa Patanugam Govindabidam Ujvalam Bharatanum Bhaktian Vidam Sunaram Mande Vishwagurun Shah Divyat Bhagavat Prem Noe Bija Pradam Devam Divyatanum Suchanda Varanam Balarka Chelanchitam Sandrananda Puram Sadeka Varanam Vairagya Vidyam Buddhim Sri Siddhanta Nidhim Subhakti Lasitam Saraswatanam Varam Bandetam Shubharam Marika Sharanam Nyashishwara Sridharam Vansha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavenibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Mahabaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gauratavishe Namah. So we're hearing from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, translation and commentary by Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupad. And this is the Adi-lila chapter 7, concerning the Pancha-tattva, Lord Chaitanya and 5 features. We begin with verse number 101. Krishna Bhakti Kora Ihai Sabara Santosh Vidantana Shunakane Taraki Badosh. Dear sir, there is no objection to your being a great devotee of Lord Krishna. Everyone is satisfied with this. But why do you avoid discussion on the Vedanta Sutra? What is the fault in it? So Mahaprabhu previously he commented why he didn't associate with the mayavadi sannyasis, why he didn't study the Vedanta Sutra, and he said in a very beautiful way, he said, my spiritual master considered me to be a great fool, and therefore he told me I wasn't qualified to study the Vedanta Sutra, but I should chant the holy names. So he said, and then I chanted the holy names, and what Mahaprabhu describes as the development of the symptoms of love of Godhead, of Krishna Prem. And he asked his spiritual master, what kind of a mantra have you given me? He's chanting the Maha Mantra. And his spiritual master said, you have pleased me very much. These are symptoms of love of Godhead. These are ecstatic symptoms. And so then after hearing Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all the mayavadi sannyasis were moved, their minds changed, and thus they spoke with pleasing words. Previously they had been criticizing him for being a sentimentalist, to just associating with fanatics and engaged in emotional chanting of the holy name. But when they heard Mahaprabhu's explanation, they were moved, and they said, dear Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, what you have said is all true. Only one who is favored by fortune attains love of Godhead. But there is no objection, dear sir, to Mahaprabhu they're speaking, dear sir, there is no objection to your being a great devotee of Lord Krishna. Everyone is satisfied with this, but why do you avoid discussion on the Vedanta Sutra? What is the fault in it? So now we're getting into really what Mahaprabhu's comments are about the philosophy of the Vedanta Sutra and his criticism of Shankaracharya's presentation of the Vedanta Sutra, known as the Sharirat Bhashya, which is what which was being studied by the mayavadi sannyasis all over India, but in particular here, in this case, the mayavadi sannyasis of Benares or Varanasi. Dear sir, there is no objection to your being a great devotee of Lord Krishna. Everyone is satisfied with this. But why do you avoid discussion on the Vedanta Sutra? What is the fault in it? Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur comments in this connection, Mayavadi sannyasis accept that the commentary by Sri Shankaracharya known as Sharirag Bhashya gives the real meaning of the Vedanta Sutra. In other words, Mayavadi sannyasis accept the meanings expressed in the explanations of the Vedanta Sutra by Shankaracharya, which are based on monism or impersonalism. Thus they explain the Vedanta Sutra, the Upanishads, and all such Vedic literatures in their own impersonal way. The great Mayavadi sannyasi, Sadananda Yogendra, has written a book known as Vedanta Shar, in which he writes, Vedanto Nama Upanishad Pramanam Tad Upakarani Sharirak Sutradini Cha. According to Sadananda Yogendra, the Vedanta Sutra and Upanishads, as presented by Sri Shankaracharya in his Sharirag Bhashya commentary, are the only sources of Vedic evidence. Actually, however, Vedanta refers to the essence of Vedic knowledge, and it is not a fact that there is nothing more than Shankaracharya's Sharirag Bhashya. There are other Vedanta commentaries written by Vaishnava Acharyas, none of whom follow Sri Shankaracharya or accept the imaginative commentary of his school. Their commentaries are based on the philosophy of duality. Monistic philosophers like Shankaracharya and his followers want to establish that God and the living entity are one, and instead of worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they present themselves as God. They want to be worshipped as God by others. Such persons do not accept the philosophies of the Vaishnavacharyas, which are known as Shuddha-dvaita, purified monism, Shuddha-dvaita, purified dualism, and Achintya-bheda-bheda, inconceivable oneness and difference. Can someone get some water, please? Mayavadis do not discuss these philosophies, for they are firmly convinced of their own philosophy of Kevala-dvaita, exclusive monism. Accepting this system of philosophy as the pure understanding of the Vedanta Sutra, they believe that Krishna has a body made of material elements, and that the activities of loving service to Krishna are sentimentality. They are known as Mayavadis because, according to their opinion, Krishna has a body made of Maya, and the loving service of the Lord executed by devotees is also Maya. They consider such devotional service to be an aspect of fruitive activities, karma kanda. According to their view, bhakti consists of mental speculation or sometimes meditation. This is the difference between the Mayavadi and Vaishnava philosophies. Thank you. After hearing Etashuni Hasi Prabhu Bolila Bachan Dugana Manaha Jadi Kore Nivedan, after hearing the Mayavadis sannyasi speak in that way, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu smiled slightly and said, "My dear sirs, if you don't mind, I can say something to you regarding Vedanta philosophy." The Mayavadi sannyasis, appreciating Lord Chaitanya, inquired from him why he did not discuss Vedanta philosophy. Actually, however, the entire system of Vaishnava activities is based on Vedanta philosophy. Vaishnavas do not neglect Vedanta, but they do not care to understand Vedanta on the basis of the Sharirag Bhashya commentary. Therefore, to clarify the situation, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, with the permission of the Mayavadi sannyasis, wanted to speak regarding Vedanta philosophy. The Vaishnavas are by far the greatest philosophers in the world, and the greatest among them was Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhu, whose philosophy was again presented less than 400 years later by Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj. Therefore, one must know very well that Vaishnava philosophers are not sentimentalists or cheap devotees like the Sahajas. All the Vaishnavacharyas were vastly learned scholars who understood Vedanta philosophy fully, for unless one knows Vedanta philosophy, he cannot be an Acharya. To be accepted as an Acharya among Indian transcendentalists who follow the Vedic principles, one must become a vastly learned scholar in Vedanta philosophy, either by studying it or hearing it. Bhakti develops in pursuance of Vedanta philosophy. This is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. Tatchara dana munayo jnana vairagya yuktaya pashyanti atmani chatmanam bhaktya shruta grihitaya. The words bhaktya shruta grihitaya in this verse are very important, for they indicate that bhakti must be based upon the philosophy of the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutra. Srila Rupa Goswami said, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancha-tattva Vidim Vina Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir Ut Patanyaiva Kalpate. Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancha-tattva Vidim Vina Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir Udpatayaiva Kalpate. Devotional service performed without reference to the Vedas, Puranas, Pancharatras, etc. must be considered sentimentalism, and it causes nothing but disturbance to society. There are different grades of Vaishnavas, Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. But to be a Madhyama Adhikari preacher, one must be a learned scholar in the Vedanta Sutra and other Vedic literatures, because when Bhakti Yoga develops on the basis of Vedanta philosophy, it is factual and steady. In this connection, we may quote the translation and purport of the verse mentioned above, which is the translation: the seriously inquisitive student or sage, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, realizes that absolute truth by rendering devotional service in terms of what he has heard from the Vedanta Sutra. The above truth is realized in full by the process of devotional service to the Lord, Vasudeva, or the personality of Godhead, who is the full-fledged absolute truth. Brahman is his transcendental bodily effulgence, and Paramatma is his partial representation. As such, Brahman or Paramatma realization of the absolute truth is but a partial realization. There are four different types of human beings: the karmis, the jnanis, the yogis, and the devotees. The karmis are materialistic, whereas the other three are transcendental. The first class transcendentalists are the devotees who have realized the Supreme Person. The second class transcendentalists are those who have partially realized the plenary portion of the Absolute Person. And the third class transcendentalists are those who have barely realized the spiritual focus on the Absolute Person. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures, the Supreme Person is realized by devotional service, which is backed by full knowledge and detachment from material association. We have already discussed the point that devotional service is followed by knowledge and detachment from material association. As Brahman and Paramatma realization are imperfect realizations of the Absolute Truth, so the means of realizing Brahman and Paramatma, in other words, the paths of Jnana and Yoga, are also imperfect means of realizing the Absolute Truth. Devotional service, which is based on the foreground of full knowledge combined with detachment from material association, and which is fixed by dint of the oral reception of the Vedanta Shruti, is the only perfect method by which the seriously inquisitive student can realize the Absolute Truth. Devotional service is not therefore meant for the less intelligent class of transcendentalists. There are three classes of devotees, namely first, second, and third class. The third class devotees, or the neophytes, who have no knowledge and are not detached from material association, but who are simply attracted by the preliminary process of worshiping the deity in the temple, are called material devotees. Material devotees are more attached to material benefit than transcendental profit. Therefore, one has to make definitive progress from the position of material devotional service to the second-class devotional position. In the second-class position, the devotees can see four principles in the devotional line, namely the personality of Godhead, his devotees, the ignorant, and the envious. One has to raise oneself at least to the stage of a second-class devotee and thus become eligible to know the absolute truth. So the second-class devotee is called a Madhyamadikari. And Madhyamadikari, the Kanishthadikaris are called materialistic devotees. They only know the Lord in the temple, basically. But the Madhyamadikaris, they see the Supreme, they worship the Supreme Lord, they befriend the devotees, they preach to the innocent, and they avoid people who are demoniac, who are very envious and who wants to cause disturbance to others. So this is the position of a second-class devotee, or we would say in general, that's the position of someone who's a preacher, or someone who's approaching other people and speaking about devotional service. A third-class devotee, therefore, has to receive the instructions of devotional service from the authoritative sources of Bhagavad. The number one Bhagavad is the established personality of devotee. And the other Bhagavad is the message of Godhead. So, in other words, the book Bhagavad and the person Bhagavad. The third class devotee, therefore, has to go to the personality of devotee in order to learn the instructions of devotional service. Such a personality of devotee is not a professional man who earns his livelihood by the business of the Bhagavatams. Such a devotee must be a representative of Sukadeva Goswami, like Sutta Goswami, and must preach the cult of devotional service for the all-around benefit of all people. A neophyte devotee has very little taste for hearing from the authorities. Such a neophyte devotee makes a show of hearing from the professional man to satisfy his senses. This sort of hearing and chanting has spoiled the whole thing, so one should be very careful about the faulty process. The holy messages of Godhead, as inculcated in the Bhagavad Gita or in Srimad Bhagavatam, are undoubtedly transcendental subjects. But even though they are so, such transcendental matters are not meant to be received from the professional man who spoils them, as the serpent spoils milk simply by the touch of his tongue. So that idea is that milk touched by the tongue of a serpent is ruined. It causes poisonous effects. A sincere devotee must therefore be prepared to hear the Vedic literature from the Upanishads, Vedanta Sutra, and other literatures left by the previous authorities or Goswamis for the benefit of his progress. Without hearing such literatures, one cannot make actual progress. And without hearing and following the instructions, the show of devotional service becomes worthless, and therefore a sort of disturbance in the path of devotional service. Unless, therefore, devotional service is established on the principles of Shruti, Smriti, Purana, and Pancha-tattva authorities, the make show of devotional service should at once be rejected. An unauthorized devotee should never be recognized as a pure devotee. By assimilation of such messages from the Vedic literatures, one can see the all-pervading, localized aspect of the personality of Godhead within his own self constantly. This is called samadhi. Iha shuni bole sarva sannyaseeragan tomake dekiye jaiche sakat narayan Hearing this, the Mayavadi sannyasis became somewhat humble and addressed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Narayan himself, who they all agreed he was. As he'd showed them a blinding effulgence originally, and then he spoke in such a way that they were very pleased by hearing what Mahaprabhu said. So first, he spoke about that he had received the Maha Mantra from his spiritual master, and Mahaprabhu presents in a humble way that his spiritual master said he wasn't qualified, so that he taught him the Maha Mantra, and Mahaprabhu felt divine ecstasy chanting that Maha Mantra. Then the Mayavadi sannyasis said, no one objects to you being a great devotee, but then why don't you study something of the Vedanta Sutra? And now Mahaprabhu is commenting that about he's beginning to comment his reputation of Shankaracharya's Shariragvasya and his impersonalist view. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu smiled slightly and said, "My dear sirs, if you don't mind, I can say something to you regarding Vedanta philosophy." So first Mahaprabhu explained things and why he's doing that. Then they said, but why don't you study the Vedanta Sutra? And now Mahaprabhu's using this, and he'll enter here in this discussion, he says, more or less is saying, well, he says, my dear sirs, if you don't mind, I can say something to you regarding Vedanta philosophy. Since you're asking, I can say something. And that's the whole point of entrance of Mahaprabhu. Because what's going to happen now is a complete refutation of Shankaracharya and his impersonalist philosophy. So, Iha shuni bole sarva sannyase ragan tomake deki ejaiche sakat narayan. Hearing this, the Mayavadi sannyasis became somewhat humble and addressed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Narayan himself, who they all agreed he was. Mayavadi sannyasis address each other as Narayan. Whenever they see another sannyasi, they offer him respect by calling him Om Namo Narayan. I offer my respect unto you, Narayan. So they all see little Narayans are all walking all over the place because they're impersonalists. They see other sannyasis, they call them Narayan. Their philosophy is one becomes God. Because they don't believe God exists, but they say that that sannyasi become the personification of Narayan. Mayavadi sannyasis address each other as Narayan. Whenever they see another sannyasi, they offer him respect by calling Om Namo Narayan. I offer my respect unto you, Narayan. Although they know perfectly well what kind of Narayan he is. Narayan has 4 hands, but although they are puffed up with the idea of being Narayan, they cannot exhibit more than 2. Since their philosophy declares that Narayan and an ordinary human being are on the same level, they sometimes use the term Daridra Narayan, poor Narayan, which was invented by a so-called Swami who did not know anything about Vedanta philosophy. Actually, that's from the Ramakrishna group, where they wanted to establish that the poor man who's was previously considered untouchable, or the poor man in the street, he's Daridra Narayan, as poor Narayan, which some devotees, some here also go, oh, poor Narayan. So, therefore, although these Mayavadi sannyasis who call themselves Narayan were actually unaware of the position of Narayan, due to their austerities, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu enabled them to understand him to be Narayan himself. Lord Chaitanya is certainly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, appearing as a devotee of Narayan, and thus the Mayavadi sannyasis, understanding that he was directly Narayan himself, whereas they were false, puffed-up Narayans, spoke to him as follows. So, Prabhupada's, you can see some of Prabhupada's sarcasm here. He's saying they understood that Mahaprabhu really is Narayan. He showed them the Brahmajyoti, practically speaking, coming from Narayan. And they could understand from what he said, he is Narayan. But they're calling all sannyasis Narayan. Now they can appreciate, okay, here is a person who is really Narayan and not one of these so-called poor two-handed Narayans. Tomar Bachana Shuni, Junaya Shravan, Tomara Madhuri Deki, Junai Narayan. Dear Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they said, to tell you the truth, we are greatly pleased to hear your words. And furthermore, your bodily features are so pleasing that we feel extraordinary satisfaction in seeing you. And he says, well, if you don't mind, I can say something. And they say, actually, we're very pleased by hearing whatever you have to say. They actually appreciate Mahaprabhu from what he spoke to them. In the Shastras it says, Atashi Krishna namadi nabhavid grayam indriyai, sevan mukhe ijivado svayam eva sfuratiyada. With one's materially contaminated senses, one cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or his name, form, qualities, or paraphernalia. But if one renders service unto him, the Lord reveals himself. Here one can see the effect of the mayavadi sannyasi's service toward Narayan. Because the Mayavadis offered a little respect to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and because they were pious and actually followed the austere rules and regulations of sannyas, they had some understanding of Vedanta philosophy, and by the grace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they could appreciate that he was none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is endowed with all 6 opulences. One of these opulences is his beauty. By his extraordinarily beautiful features, by his extraordinary beautiful bodily features, the Mayavadi sannyasis recognized Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Narayan himself. He was not a farcical Narayan like the Daridra Narayans invented by so-called sannyasis. That term, Daridra Narayan, first of all, it's a false term to give some status to people who are poor, which may have not been treated properly in society. So to give them some sentimental footing, they say, oh, they're poor Narayan, they're Daridra Narayan. The poor man in the street is actually Narayan. The implication is that we're all Narayan. We all become God. So that's, first of all, a false philosophical position to take, that the poor man in the street is Daridra Narayan. Okay. Tomara prabhave sabara ananditaman kabu asangatam nahe tomara vachan. Furthermore, the term Daridra Narayan is more than false. It's offensive to the Lord, because the Lord, the idea of Bhagavan means one who has 6 opulences: fame, beauty, strength, intelligence, renunciation, and power or strength. Fame, name, power, intelligence, renunciation, and what I have to think of these 6 in order: name, fame, the 6 opulences, beauty, first of all, beauty, strength, fame, beauty, strength, fame, intelligence. Then what will come? Beauty, fame, strength, intelligence, renunciation, and wealth. Good. Those are the 6. And to say that someone's Daridra Narayan, it means the Lord without any wealth, that's contradictory. He has 6 6 opulences. To say that he's poor, it's to say that's an offense to the Lord. So not only is the term Daridra Narayan being used as a political term to justify, to say, oh, we should do good to others, including the poor man in the street. Well, that's true. But the way we do good to such a person is to be able to give him or help him with something of devotional service. If we're going to feed such a person, we want to give him Krishna Prasadam. If we are going to help somebody, we want to help them, not just in terms of some sentimental idea of society to help the poor, but we want to help everyone by bringing them to the platform of devotional service, which will also include, of course, giving them prasadam, giving them, association, and by that way they can come to the point of actually understanding something of what is actually human life. But anyway, so the term Daridra Narayan is both political and an offense to the Lord. We could say that the poor man is Narayan. Well, how can Narayan, who's the husband of the goddess of fortune, be poor? So Tomara Prabhave Sabar Ananditaman Kabu Asangata Nahe Tomara Bachan. Dear sir, by your influence our minds are greatly satisfied, and we believe that your words will never be unreasonable. Therefore you may speak on the Vedanta Sutra. In this verse, the words Tomara Prabhave. In this verse, the words Tomara Prabhave, your influence, are very important. Unless one is spiritually advanced, he cannot influence an audience. Bhaktivedanta Thakur has sung Shuddha Bhakata Charana Renu Bhajana Anukula. Unless one associates with a pure devotee, he cannot be influenced to understand devotional service. These mayavadi sannyasis were fortunate enough to meet the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of a devotee. And certainly, they were greatly influenced by the Lord. They knew that since a perfectly advanced spiritualist never says anything false, all his words are reasonable and agree with the Vedic version. A highly realized person never says anything that has no meaning. Mayavadi philosophers claim to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and this has no meaning. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu never uttered such nonsense. The Mayavadi sannyasis were convinced about his personality, and therefore they wanted to hear the purport of Vedanta philosophy from him. Prabhu Kohe Vedanta Sutra Ishwara Vachan Vyasa Rupe Koila Jaha Sri Narayan. The Lord said, Vedanta philosophy consists of words spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, in the form of Vyasadeva. The Vedanta Sutra, which consists of aphorisms revealing the method of understanding the Vedic knowledge, is the concise form of all Vedic knowledge. It begins with the words Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now is the time to inquire about the absolute truth. The human form of life is especially meant for this purpose, and therefore the Vedanta Sutra very concisely explains the human mission. This is confirmed by the words of the Vayu and Skanda Puranas, which define the sutra as follows. Apaksharam asandirgdam saravat vishvatomukam ashtobam anavadyam cha sutram sutra vido vidu. A sutra is a compilation of aphorisms that expresses the essence of all knowledge in a minimum of words. It must be universally applicable and faultless in its linguistic presentation. Anyone familiar with such sutras must be aware of the Vedanta Sutra, which is well known among scholars by the following additional names: Brahma Sutra, Shariraka, Vyasa Sutra, Bhadaranyaka Bhararayana Sutra, Uttaramimamsa, and Vedanta Darshan. There are 4 chapters, adhyayas, in the Vedanta Sutra, and there are 4 chapters, adhyayas, in the Vedanta Sutra, and there are 4 divisions, padas, in each chapter. Therefore, the Vedanta Sutra may be referred to as Sodashapada, or 16 divisions of aphorisms. The theme of each and every division is fully described in terms of 5 different subject matters, adhikaranas, which are technically called pratigya, hetu, udaharana, upanaya, and nigamana. Every theme must necessarily be explained with reference to pratigya, or a solemn declaration of the purpose of the treatise. The solemn declaration given in the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra is a Tato Brahma Jigyasa, which indicates that this book was written with the solemn declaration to inquire about the absolute truth. Similarly, reasons must be expressed, hetu, examples must be given in terms of various facts, udaharana. The theme must gradually be brought nearer for understanding, upanaya, and finally it must be supported by authoritative quotations from the Vedic Shastras, nigamana. According to the great dictionary compiler, Hemachandra, also known as Koshakara, Vedanta refers to the purpose of the Upanishads and the Brahman portion of the Vedas. Professor Apte, in his dictionary, describes the Brahman portion of the Vedas as that portion which states the rules for employment of hymns at various sacrifices and gives detailed explanations of their origins, sometimes with lengthy illustrations in the form of legends and stories. I have that Sanskrit dictionary of Apte. It is distinct, according to the great dictionary compiler, Hemachandra, also known as Koshakara, Vedanta refers to the purpose of the Upanishads and the Brahman portion of the Vedas. Professor Apte, in his dictionary, describes the Brahman portion of the Vedas as that portion which states the rules for employment of hymns at various sacrifices and gives detailed explanation of their origin, sometimes with lengthy illustrations in the form of legends and stories. It is distinct from the mantra portion of the Vedas. Hemachandra says that the supplement of the Vedas is called the Vedanta Sutra. Veda means knowledge, and Anta means the end. In other words, proper understanding of the ultimate purpose of the Vedas is called Vedanta knowledge. Such knowledge is given in the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra. Such knowledge, as given in the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, must be supported by the Upanishads. According to learned scholars, there are 3 different sources of knowledge, which are called Prashtanatraya. According to these scholars, Vedanta is one of such sources, for it presents Vedic knowledge on the basis of logic and sound arguments. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, Brahma Sutra Padais Chaiva Hetu Mad Bir Vinishchitai. Understanding of the ultimate goal of life is ascertained in the Brahma Sutra by legitimate logic and argument concerning cause and effect. Therefore, the Vedanta Sutra is known as Nyaya Prasthana. The Upanishads are known as Shruti Prasthana, and the Gita, Mahabharata, and Puranas are known as Smriti Prasthana. All scientific knowledge of transcendence must be supported by Shruti, Smriti, and a sound logical basis. It is said that both the Vedic knowledge and the supplement of the Vedas called the Sattvata Pancha-tattva emanated from the breathing of Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Vedanta Sutra aphorisms were compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, a powerful incarnation of Sri Narayan, although it is sometimes said that they were compiled by a great sage named Apantaratma. The Pancha-tattva and Vedanta Sutras, however, express the same opinions. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore confirms that there is no difference in opinion between the two, and he declares that because the Vedanta Sutras are compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, it may be understood to have emanated from the breathing of Sri Narayan. Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur comments that while Vyasadeva was compiling the Vedanta Sutra, 7 of his great saintly contemporaries were also engaged in similar work. These saints were Atreya Rishi, Ashmaratya, Odalomi, Karshnajini, Kashakrishna, Jaimani, and Badari. In addition, it is stated that Parashari and Karmandi Bhikshu also discussed the Vedanta Sutra aphorisms before Vyasadeva. As mentioned above, the Vedanta Sutra consists of 4 chapters. The first 2 chapters discuss the relationship of the living entity with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is known as Sambandha Gyan, or knowledge of the relationship. The third chapter describes how one can act in his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with the Supreme Lord is described by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jiva Swarupoi Krishna Nitya Das. The living entity is an eternal servant of Krishna, the Supreme God. Therefore, to act in that relationship, one must perform sadhana bhakti, or the prescribed duties of service to the Supreme Personality of God. This is called Abhideya Gyan. The 4th chapter describes the result of such devotional service, Prayojana Gyan. This ultimate goal of life is to go back home, back to Godhead. The words Anavritti, Shabdat in the Vedanta Sutra indicate the ultimate goal. So what's being described here is Sambandha Abhideya and Prayojana, the relationship Vedic literature deals with this. Sambandha, the relationship you have with the Lord. Abhideya, the process of working within that relationship or satisfying the Lord. And Prayojana, the goal, which is to develop love of God. Srila Vyasadeva, a powerful incarnation of Narayan, compiled the Vedanta Sutra, and in order to protect it from unauthorized commentaries, he personally composed Srimad Bhagavatam on the instruction of his spiritual master Narad Muni as the original commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Besides Srimad Bhagavatam, there are commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra composed by all the major Vaishnavacharyas, and in each of them, devotional service to the Lord is described very explicitly. Only those who follow Shankara's commentary have described the Vedanta Sutra in an impersonal way, without reference to Vishnu Bhakti or devotional service to the Lord Vishnu. So only those who follow Shankara's commentary have described the Vedanta Sutra in an impersonal way, without reference to Vishnu Bhakti or devotional service to the Lord Vishnu. Generally, people very much appreciate this Sharirag Bhashya, or impersonal description of the Vedanta Sutra, but all commentaries that are devoid of devotional service to Lord Vishnu must be considered to differ in purpose from the original Vedanta Sutra. In other words, Lord Chaitanya definitely confirmed that the commentaries or bhashyas written by the Vaishnavacharyas on the basis of devotional service to Lord Vishnu, and not the Sharirag Bhashya of Shankaracharya, give the actual explanation of the Vedanta Sutra. So one thing that I'm reading the commentaries on this 7th chapter of Mahaprabhu's Pancha-tattva, and I consider this chapter gives a very good indication of, devotional service, and the purports are very valuable. One thing about purports, if we had all the commentaries of all the acharyas, we could see those commentaries are very vast, and some of these commentaries here are very long. So it is difficult to remember the original flow. But I've read through the Chaitanya Charitamrita several times, and I feel the commentaries are valuable, but at the same time, and Prabhupada said his ecstasy is in the commentaries, at the same time, one can see that if you deal with the subject matter, then if you were, so to speak, a research scholar and you were reading everything of the acharyas, you would find a vast volume of commentaries on each verse. And so that would be very good for one who's trying to understand deeply what's going on in these verses. But not everything can be read in that way, because when you read through the verses of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, you also want to follow the flow of the verses themselves. So in this reading, I'm reading all the commentaries. And some of them, as I said, are very extensive. When you go on with a commentary of 3-4 pages, then you may forget what the original verse is and the verses preceding. So we're trying to remember and mention those verses in preceding. But this is the way I feel somebody would study if they were, say, truly were a graduate student trying to understand deeply what is going on. And for that reason, we're reading them. Somebody may draw that. But also, I have many readings of the Chaitanya Charitamrita online. And one can also find readings where I'm just giving the verses themselves and going through on the basis of that. So I'm saying this is very good information also for someone who wants to research deeply into this and understand what is being said. So that kind of research is very, very useful. But at the same time, we would want to read the Chaitanya Charitamrita perhaps with also the flow of the verses. And I feel the Chaitanya Charitamrita that I have here has Prabhupada and Prabhupada's translations and commentaries. And he said his ecstasy is in the commentaries. We also have one Chaitanya Charitamrita that was published in the Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mud. And it's published in one volume. And we have had people from all in Bengali, but not in Bengali. It's in Bengali. It also has Sanskrit verses, but Sanskrit verses can also be written in the Bengali alphabet. They can be written in virtually any of the Indian alphabets, in Devanagari or Bengali. Many of the works of the Goswamis are in Bengali. So anyway, that Chaitanya Charitamrita, which I'll show to people here. This book is Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it's presented in one volume, very, very condensed and concise. I mean, all the verses are here. You can see how full the pages are. But we've had persons come from all over Bengal to come and purchase this, because imagine with this is all in one volume, the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita. We can see up here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 volumes, thick volumes like this, with the purports and everything. But here is also the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the Sanskrit verses are explained, and the Bengali verses are what we would call, they're Sadhu Bhasha. They're not the Bengali spoken on the streets, but they're educated Bengali, and they're understood by some persons. I mean, it's not currently spoken Bengali, but can be understood by devotees, especially those who have studied. So here's the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita in one volume. Sometime I feel it would be good to have a translation of this, because it's the Bengali verses are there, and then the Sanskrit verses are presented as they are, but also with some commentary on the Sanskrit verses. So this also would be, for someone, a very good project to be able to present this Chaitanya Charitamrita with translation. You know. Then, if we read these verses also, we would be able to, so both Prabhupada's translation, which I've read for years, but also this was prepared by the Bengali was presented, and this whole thing was laid out originally by Shrava, who's passed away. But this was very much appreciated by Srila Govinda Maharaj, and also he also presented in this way he presented the Bhagavad Gita in Bengali. Shrava did. He also presented the Prapana Jivanamrita, Chaitanya Bhagavat, the songbook, Gita-upanishad, all laid out in Bengali. A very, very wonderful contribution. I mean, Shrava would describe himself as a truck driver, but he was actually a very educated man. And a close friend of mine. So anyway, I'll stop here. We'll sing Hari Haraya. And I'm just saying this because sometimes when we read purports that go on for 3-4 pages, and there's so much beautiful information there. And sometimes people we might use the term, their attention span may go out the window with all that explanation. Hari Haraya Namah Krishna Jaravaya Namah Haraya Namah Krishna Jaravaya Namah Jaravaya Maravaya Keshavaya Namah Jaravaya Maravaya Keshavaya Namah Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinatha Maranaman Giridhari Gopinatha Maranaman Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Dharadhara Shiva Sari Gora Bhakta Vrinda Dharadhara Shiva Sari Gora Bhakta Vrinda Arupa Sanatan Bhakta Raguna Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhakta Raguna Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raguna Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raguna H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan Jaite Vignana Shabishta Puran Jaite Vignana Abhishta Puran H.I. Gosai Jarmui Dharadan H.I. Gosai Jarmui Dharadan Tasabar Pada Renu Mora Panchagras Sasavar pada renu mora panchagas Tare charana sevi bhakta sanibas Tare charana sevi bhakta sanibas Janame janame more ambilas Janame janame more ambilas Hey jai gosai jabe braje koilaba Hey jai gosai jabe braje koilaba Radha Krishna nitya lila korila prakash Radha Krishna nitya lila korila prakash Anande bolo hari bhaja vrindavan Anande bolo hari bhaja vrindavan Shri Guru Vaishnava bhare manjai aman Shri Guru Vaishnava bhare manjai aman Shri Guru Vaishnava pad padma koriyan Shri Guru Vaishnava pad padma koriyan Harinam Sankirtana kohe Narottam Udas Harinam Sankirtana kohe Narottam Udas Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Jai Saparikara Shishi Guru Guranga Gandharvika Giridhari Ju Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajakacharya Ashtatara Sadasi Shimad Srila Bhakti Nirmalacharya Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajakacharya Ashtatara Sadasi Shimad Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajakacharya Ashtatara Sadasi Shimad Srila Bhakti Rakshidhar Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Bhagavan Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Gaur Kishordas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivedanta Thakur Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Rupanuga Guru Bharga Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Das Raghunath Srad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Prem Se Go Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Vishvaparanya Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Kusham Ashram Maharaj ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivedanta Thakur ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Tilat Neri Maharaj ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki Jai. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu ki Jai. All the assembled devotees ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopi Govardhan Sham Kunda Radha Kunda Kalindi Yamuna Jo ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Hare.